Hey guys, whiners. A few weeks ago, my world came crashing down in a way I never imagined. Let me take you back to where it all began. It was a regular Wednesday evening, and I'd gotten off work earlier than usual. When I walked into the house, I heard Emma, my wife of 6 years, laughing in the living room. That laugh, soft and carefree, was the kind I used to hear all the time, the kind that used to be meant for me. But this time, something about it was different. I walked in, curious. She was sitting on the couch, her eyes glued to her phone, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Hey, what's so funny? I asked, trying to sound casual. She nearly jumped out of her skin, fumbling to lock her phone before giving me a smile that felt forced. Oh, just some stupid meme Ashley sent me, she said, waving it off. You wouldn't get it. I nodded, not wanting to push, but something about the moment didn't sit right. That laugh, that smile, they weren't for me anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying her reaction over and over. Sometime after midnight, I heard her moving around the house. Curious, I got up and followed the faint sound of her voice coming from the kitchen. It was quiet, hushed, but I could make out the words. I missed you too, she said, her voice warm and soft in a way that cut through me. I'll see you soon. My stomach dropped. There was no mistaking the intimacy in her tone. It wasn't playful or casual. It was affectionate, tender, the kind of tone reserved for someone you care about deeply. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. That was the moment I knew. She was cheating on me. Everything in me wanted to storm downstairs, grab the phone out of her hand, and demand answers. To scream, to cry, to make her explain herself. But something held me back. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was the realization that I couldn't just blow up in the moment. I needed to think. I needed a plan. After hearing Emma's late-night phone call, I felt like my world had been flipped upside down. But instead of confronting her right away, I decided to play it smart. If she thought she could lie and sneak around, then I'd let her think she was in the clear. For now. I needed to see the full picture before I made my move. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. Over breakfast, I asked her about her plans for the day. She smiled, the same fake smile I was starting to recognize, and told me she had back-to-back meetings and might stay late at the office. Sounds busy, I said, forcing a calmness into my voice. Don't work too hard. She just nodded, burying herself in her phone again. I noticed how her face lit up when a text came through, her fingers flying across the screen. When I asked her what she was doing, she muttered something about work emails and quickly locked her phone. It was obvious she was hiding something. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. She'd be glued to her phone, grinning like a teenager, but when I walked into the room, she'd lock the screen and act like nothing had happened. Her excuses for staying late at work became more frequent, and her tone grew colder, more distant. But there were moments when she'd get a text and her eyes would sparkle, that told me exactly where her affection was going. I didn't let on that I'd noticed. I kept up the facade of the clueless husband, all while mentally noting every inconsistency in her stories and every subtle shift in her behavior. My gut told me there was more to uncover, and I wasn't about to tip my hand too soon. The hardest part was keeping my anger in check. Every time she smiled at her phone, every time she lied about her plans, I wanted to call her out, to scream at her for betraying me. But I held back. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about making sure she felt the weight of what she'd done. I needed more information, more proof. And I needed to be patient. The storm was coming, but for now, I had to stay calm. As the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emma's betrayal ran deeper than I'd first thought. I needed to know more. That's when I decided to search for answers, not just through her actions, but through her thoughts. One evening, while Emma was out working late, I started combing through the house. I wasn't proud of it, but I wasn't going to sit back and let her lies continue unchecked. I checked drawers, her laptop, even the notes app on her tablet. That's when I found it. Her diary. It was tucked away in the back of her closet, beneath a pile of clothes she rarely wore. I hesitated for a moment, feeling a pang of guilt. But then I remembered her late-night whispers, her glowing texts, and the way she looked at her phone like it was her lifeline. Whatever guilt I felt vanished. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking. Most of it was mundane, work stress, daily annoyances. But then I hit a section that made my blood run cold. She wrote about feeling trapped, about how she wanted more out of life but didn't know how to get it. She mentioned how much she resented feeling like she was in the shadow of others, always striving but never quite reaching her goals. What surprised me most was how little she mentioned me. I wasn't the focus of her resentment, but I wasn't the center of her world either. I was just there, a backdrop to her dissatisfaction. And then there it was, written plainly in her neat, deliberate handwriting. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be truly free, to not care about the consequences and just go after what I want. I sat there for a long time, staring at that sentence. It was clear she'd been wrestling with these feelings for a while, but instead of talking to me, she'd turned to someone else. Her diary didn't name him, but it didn't need to. The pieces were starting to fall into place. That's when the idea struck me. If Emma wanted to be the star of her story, always chasing the spotlight, then I'd make sure she felt what it was like to live in the shadow. I knew exactly who to turn to. Sophia, her coworker and professional rival. The two of them had never gotten along, and I'd heard more than enough about their competitive relationship over the years. Sophia was ambitious, clever, and, most importantly, had always shown a not-so-subtle interest in me. I didn't confront Emma that night. Instead, I carefully put her diary back where I'd found it and started planning my next move. Finding Emma's diary gave me more than just insight into her thoughts. It gave me the foundation for my plan. If Emma wanted to feel like the center of attention, I'd make sure she knew what it was like to feel secondary. And there was no better way to do that than by involving Sophia, her coworker and longtime rival. Sophia and Emma had always had a tense relationship. Emma would come home complaining about Sophia, how she was too ambitious, too eager to steal credit, or too fake with her charm. But from where I stood, Sophia was sharp, confident, and most importantly, she had an obvious interest in me. At every office party or work event, she'd always find a reason to strike up a conversation, compliment me, or casually touch my arm. I used to brush it off as harmless flirting, but now I saw it as an opportunity. I started small, testing the waters with a message. Hey, Sophia, I know you're always busy, but if you ever want to vent about work over coffee, let me know. I could use some insight into how you manage to stay so cool under pressure. It didn't take long for her to reply. Jake, wow, that's sweet of you to say. I'd love that. Name the time and place? Bingo. I knew I had her attention. The first meeting was completely innocent. Or at least that's how I framed it. We met at a cozy cafe far from her office where we talked about work, life, and everything in between. I kept the conversation light, slipping in compliments that I knew would make her feel noticed. Sophia, for her part, was all smiles and laughter, clearly enjoying the attention. You're really easy to talk to, Jake, she said, leaning forward slightly. Emma's lucky to have you. I smiled, playing the part of the charming but slightly troubled husband. Thanks, Sophia. It's nice to hear that. Sometimes I feel like I don't really get to shine, you know? Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's hard when you're stuck in someone else's shadow, isn't it? That line sealed it for me. Sophia wasn't just willing to listen, she was ready to take my side, even if she didn't fully understand what was happening yet. Over the next few weeks, I kept in touch with Sophia. I made sure to mention how much I admired her work ethic, and subtly hinted at how underappreciated I felt. She ate it up, always quick to reassure me or offer her perspective. I could tell she was starting to see herself as my confidant, my ally. And Emma? She didn't suspect a thing. She was too busy texting her mystery man and juggling her lies to notice that I was slowly laying the groundwork for my revenge. I signed a note from my boy and was still just the tip-off to start, but I needed her thoughts to be practical. I needed her to split my profits and spend the money. With Sophia firmly on my side, it was time to take things up a notch. I needed to provoke Emma, to make her feel like she was losing control, not just in our relationship, but in the one area where she prided herself most, her career. It was a delicate game, but one I was prepared to play. Sophia and I started meeting more frequently, always under the guise of work discussions. She opened up to me about the challenges she faced at the office, including how Emma often tried to undercut her. I played the supportive role, listening intently and offering advice, all while steering the conversation toward subtle ways she could outshine Emma. "You're really talented, Sophia," I said during one of our coffee meetups. "Honestly, if I were in charge, you'd already have that promotion Emma keeps going on about." Her eyes lit up at the compliment. "You really think so?" "Absolutely," I replied. "You've got the drive and the skills. Emma's good, but let's be real, you're better." It didn't take much convincing. Sophia was ambitious, and my encouragement gave her the push she needed to start asserting herself more at work. Within weeks, she was presenting bolder ideas in meetings, taking credit for team successes, and positioning herself as a top contender for the promotion Emma had been eyeing. Meanwhile, I made sure to subtly feed Emma's insecurities. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, I casually mentioned, "Sophia, I said, slicing into my steak, Sophia was telling me about that new strategy she's pitching to your boss. Sounds like a game changer." Emma looked up, her fork pausing midair. "Sophia, what do you mean?" "Oh, nothing," I said with a shrug. "She just mentioned how she's been working overtime on it. It seems like she's really stepping up her game lately." Emma's jaw tightened, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. "She's always been a show-off," she muttered, stabbing her salad with unnecessary force. Over the next few days, Emma's behavior became more erratic. She spent longer hours at work, constantly checking her email and snapping at me over small things. It was clear she felt threatened by Sophia's sudden rise, and I made sure to stoke the flames whenever I could. One night, as we sat in the living room, I casually dropped another bombshell. "Sophia mentioned you have a tough quarterly report coming up. She said she's worried about whether you'll be able to handle it." Emma's eyes narrowed, her face flushing with anger. "She said that? What the hell does she know about my work?" I shrugged, pretending to be oblivious. "I'm just saying what she told me. Maybe you should talk to her about it." Emma didn't say anything after that, but the fury in her eyes was unmistakable. The cracks in her composure were starting to show, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. Emma's suspicion had officially taken root, and I could see it growing every day. She was snapping more often, throwing snide remarks at me about how much I seemed to know about Sophia's work. Her paranoia was exactly what I needed to push my plan further. One evening, as I walked through the door, I could feel the tension in the air. Emma was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, but her expression was icy. "Hey," I said casually, hanging my jacket. "Rough day?" She didn't look up. "Fine." I raised an eyebrow, sensing the storm brewing just beneath the surface. "Sophia mentioned you've got that quarterly report coming up. She said she's worried about how tight the deadline is. You doing okay with it?" Her head snapped up, and her glare could have melted steel. "Why do you keep bringing her up?" she demanded. "Is there something I should know, Jake?" "Whoa," I said, holding up my hands. "What's with the attitude? I was just making conversation." "Making conversation?" she repeated, her voice rising. "You've been talking about Sophia nonstop lately. What's going on between you two?" I forced myself to keep calm, though inside I was grinning. Come on. Sophia's your coworker. She talks about work. I listened. It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal," she snapped, standing up. "She's been trying to undermine me at the office for months, and now you're acting like her biggest cheerleader. Do you even realize how that looks?" I tilted my head, pretending to be confused. "What does it look like, Emma? Because as far as I know, you're the one who's been sneaking around and hiding things. Should we talk about that?" Her face went pale for a moment before she recovered. "Don't try to change the subject," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm asking you about Sophia." I leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms. "And I'm asking you why you're so worked up. You sure this isn't just guilt talking?" She froze, her eyes darting to her phone before narrowing at me. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" I shot back. "You've been distant, sneaking around, lying to my face, and now you want to play the victim? Sorry, Emma, but I'm not buying it." Her jaw clenched, and for a moment it looked like she might confess. But then she straightened up, her expression hardening. "You're unbelievable," she spat. "I don't have to explain myself to you." "Maybe not," I said calmly, "but don't expect me to stop asking questions." The cracks in her facade were widening, and I could see the panic creeping into her eyes. She was losing control, and she knew it. All that was left was to deliver the final blow, and I already knew exactly how to do it. The tension between Emma and me had reached its peak. Every interaction was a battle, every word loaded with unspoken accusations. She was unraveling, and I could see it in the way she snapped at small things, how her eyes lingered on me with suspicion when she thought I wasn't looking. It was time to bring my plan to its crescendo. One evening, I decided to invite Sophia over to our house. For work, I told her. Sophia, unsuspecting, happily agreed. She had no idea she was stepping into the final act of a game she didn't even know she was part of. I made sure the evening looked professional enough to avoid raising Sophia's eyebrows. I set up a couple of documents on the dining table and poured 2 glasses of wine. We sat side by side, going over her upcoming presentation. We laughed and chatted, the kind of easy conversation that would undoubtedly look intimate from the outside. What Sophia didn't know was that Emma wasn't working late that night. I'd timed everything perfectly, ensuring Emma would arrive home earlier than she expected. Earlier than Sophia expected, too. As we were laughing over a joke, the sound of the front door unlocking cut through the room. Sophia froze mid-laugh, looking toward the door. "Is someone here?" she asked, her brow furrowing, joining me at my desk. I sipped my wine, keeping my expression calm. "Oh, that's probably Emma. She's home early." Before Sophia could respond, Emma walked into the room. Her face was a mixture of surprise and fury as she took in the scene before her. Sophia and I sitting close, wine glasses in hand, papers spread across the table like an afterthought. "What the hell is going on here?" Emma demanded, her voice trembling with rage. Sophia, oblivious to the underlying tension, smiled nervously. "Oh, hey, Emma. Jake was just helping me with my presentation." Emma's eyes narrowed, flicking between us. "Helping you? At our house? Over wine?" "Relax, Emma," I said, keeping my tone calm but laced with just enough indifference to stoke the fire. "That's not what it looks like." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, really? Because it looks like my husband is playing house with my coworker." "Care to explain?" I stood up slowly, locking eyes with her. "I could ask you the same question about your late-night phone calls and secret texts," I said, my voice cold and deliberate. "But I figured you wouldn't be in the mood for explanations." Sophia looked completely lost, her gaze darting between us. "Wait. What's going on?" Emma ignored her, stepping closer to me. "You're unbelievable," she hissed. "You think this little show, it makes you better than me." "Better than you?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "I don't have to try, Emma. You've been lying and sneaking around for weeks, and now you're upset because the tables have turned?" Her face turned bright red, and for a moment I thought she might hit me. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. Sophia sat there in stunned silence, clearly trying to process what had just happened. "Jake, I don't understand." I gave her a tight smile, standing up to gather the papers. "Don't worry about it, Sophia. I'll explain everything some other time. Thanks for coming over." She hesitated, looking like she wanted to press further, but eventually she nodded and left. As the door closed behind her, I poured myself another glass of wine and leaned against the counter. The climax had been delivered, but the final act was still to come. The house was eerily quiet after Sophia left. Emma hadn't come back downstairs, and I wasn't about to chase after her. Instead, I poured another glass of wine and took my time, letting the tension simmer. I knew Emma was stewing in her anger and confusion, and that was exactly what I wanted. The next morning, I woke up early and prepared the final piece of my plan. I crafted a message that would deliver the knockout punch, one that would leave no room for her to play the victim. I knew she'd check her phone first thing in the morning, she always did, so I made sure the message was waiting for her. "Now you know what it's like to feel secondary in someone else's life." I left my phone on the kitchen counter and made myself breakfast, casually waiting for her to come downstairs. When she finally appeared, her hair was disheveled and her eyes were puffy from what I assumed was a night spent crying. She barely looked at me as she poured herself a cup of coffee. The silence stretched between us until she finally checked her phone. I watched her face as she read the message. Her hands trembled slightly and her lips pressed into a thin line. "What is this supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice low and unsteady. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee. "I think it's pretty clear, don't you?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she slammed her mug down on the counter. "You're disgusting," she spat. "You think this makes you better than me? You think humiliating me fixes anything?" I set my cup down, meeting her glare with a calm expression. "I think it's a start, but this isn't about fixing anything, Emma. This is about showing you how it feels to be lied to, ignored, and treated like you don't matter. Her expression turned to one of wariness and apprehension. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. You've destroyed everything. No, Emma, I said, standing up. You destroyed everything the moment you decided to cheat. I just made sure you felt the consequences. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, her anger giving way to desperation. Jake, please, she whispered. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can... Stop, I said firmly, cutting her off. What? There's no fixing this. I'm done. I grabbed my car keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing there. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The anger that had fueled me for weeks was beginning to fade, replaced by a sense of finality. The game was over, and I'd won. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. The days following the confrontation were a blur of awkward silences and heavy tension. Emma tried everything to win me back. Apologies, tearful pleas, promises to change, but I didn't waver. My mind was made up, and there was no going back. One evening, we finally sat down to talk. I had the divorce papers ready, neatly stacked on the coffee table. Emma looked at them like they were a bomb waiting to go off. Jake, she began, her voice trembling. Please, let's not do this. I know I hurt you, and I know I was wrong, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. Don't throw everything away. I sighed, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. Emma, this isn't about throwing anything away. This is about facing reality. You destroyed our marriage the moment you decided to cheat. There's nothing left to fix. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I was stupid, okay? I wasn't thinking straight. I felt lost, and I made a mistake. But I love you. Doesn't that count for anything? I looked at her, my heart aching for the woman I used to know. She said, but that woman was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't trust. Love, I said quietly. Love doesn't look like this, Emma. Love doesn't lie, cheat, or betray. Whatever this is, it's not love. Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands. Jake, please, she begged. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job if it makes you feel better. Just don't leave me. I stood up, unable to sit any longer. This isn't about your job or therapy, I said. This is about trust, and I can't trust you anymore. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I picked up the divorce papers and handed them to her. I'm sorry that you worry about it. I promise I will never tell my father if this comes to pass. I've already signed these, she said, her voice hollow. You really mean this, she said, her voice hollow. Yes, I replied. I do. For a long moment, she just sat there, staring at the papers. Then, with a shaky breath, she reached for a pen and signed her name. When she finished, she pushed the papers back toward me and looked up, her face pale and tear-streaked. I hope you're happy, she said bitterly. I didn't respond. Instead, I picked up the papers and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the choices she'd made. After the divorce was finalized, I thought I'd feel a sense of triumph or closure. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness. The revenge, as satisfying as it had been in the moment, didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't rebuild the life I'd lost. I was free, but I wasn't whole. Sophia and I hadn't spoken since the night she'd left my house, bewildered by the scene she'd walked into. At first, I'd thought it was for the best. She had been a tool in my plan, a pawn in my game with Emma. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not just about the role she'd played in my scheme, but about how genuine and supportive she'd been, even when she didn't know the whole story. One afternoon, a few weeks after the dust had settled, I decided to reach out. I sent her a simple message. Hey, Sophia, I owe you an explanation. Coffee this week. Her reply came almost instantly. I was wondering if I'd hear from you. Let's do it. We met at the same cafe where we'd first started talking, but this time there was no pretense, no ulterior motive. I told her everything about Emma's affair, my discovery, and how I'd used Sophia as part of my plan for revenge. I expected her to be angry, to walk out and never speak to me again. But instead, she just sat there, listening intently. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me for a moment. So, let me get this straight, she said, a small smirk playing on her lips. You used me to make your cheating wife jealous, and now you're here, what, apologizing? Not just apologizing, I said earnestly. I'm also thanking you. Whether you realize it or not, you reminded me of what it feels like to be valued, to feel alive. And I'm sorry for how I went about it, but you gave me a second wind, Sophia. She stared at me, her expression softening. You know, Jake, I should be furious with you, but I get it. You were hurting. And honestly, I don't think I've ever felt as appreciated as I did when we were talking. Does that mean I get another chance? I asked cautiously. She chuckled, shaking her head. You're lucky you're charming. What started as a hesitant coffee meeting turned into something much more. Sophia and I began spending more time together. Dinners, walks in the park, lazy Sundays where we talked about everything and nothing. At first I thought it was just a rebound, a way to fill the void Emma had left behind. But as the weeks turned into months, I realized Sophia wasn't a replacement. She was someone entirely new. She challenged me, made me laugh, and helped me see life through a lens I hadn't looked through in years. What began as a plan for revenge had unexpectedly become the start of something real. That's not to say the pain of Emma's betrayal disappeared overnight. It didn't. But Sophia helped me see that my past didn't have to define my future. Her ambition and positivity rubbed off on me, and I started pursuing things I'd put on the back burner. Expanding my business, traveling, reconnecting with old friends. I felt like I'd been given a second chance, not just in love, but in life. The revenge had given me the strength to move on, but Sophia gave me a reason to look forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me what you think about that story. Have a good day, and bye.